Hey everybody, welcome to the Animation Conversation. I'm Rusty here with my co-host.
What's up, party people? It's your old pal F.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Animation Conversation with Rusty and...
It's your old buddy F. Hey everybody.
Hey everybody. So, this is our first official episode. Welcome back to the semi-annual podcast conversation here. So today we're just kind of riff. We're gonna mainly just interview each other and kind of get a feel for why we love animation and cartoons so much. So I'm gonna jump into some questions. I kind of came up with a few questions to ask you because I've interviewed you already once before with Mike, and now I get to kind of ask you some questions that I might have not had ready at the time. You know, things that just came to mind. So one of the, I guess, first questions that we could just jump straight into to be real forward with it is, how did you become interested in animation at all, and what kind of inspired you to pursue animation? Like, what brought on the love of cartoons and animation that you so chose that as a profession?
That's a great question, and I'd like to answer it by ignoring it entirely. I'd like to say something before we begin, because I find this interesting about our little podcast.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sorry, I kind of dived in a little too soon there. Yeah.
See, that's what you signed up for. That is the difficult bastard.
Hey, I love it.
You signed up for. And no, honestly, what I want people to understand, you and I don't know each other that well.
Other than some correspondence through social media and an interview on another podcast, this is pretty much as raw as it gets in learning another individual. Yeah.
We you're never coming to my house. I don't want you to know where I live. I'm kidding. No, but this is not one of those situations where it's like, oh, two old pals get together and do a podcast. Like, I barely know you. And that's what I think is going to be kind of interesting is it is interesting. We're not only going to learn about animation, we're going to learn about each other.
Yeah, which is great. I actually have experienced this phenomenon once before with our executive producer here, Mike. Me and Mike weren't old buddies, old pals, old friends. It was a social media. He had shot out a request looking for people to start podcasts, and I answered the call. And here we are a year and a half later with Bois, and now he'll have an executive production credit for our podcast too here. So it's been an evolution for sure. He's a good friend, I can say for sure. So by the end of this, I'm sure in a year's time we'll be saying the same thing.
Yeah, and I could tell when I first tuned in the Bois podcast, I'd never heard it before, but you guys were so nice the way you reached out on social media, and the second I started listening to the show, I'm like, oh, this is not some fly-by-night operation. These guys actually know what they're doing. I listened to the whole show. It was
or the appearance of, if nothing else, the appearance of.
Well, what else matters?
Fake it till you make it. Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, I listened to the whole thing and I'm like, wow, this is as legitimate as any other podcast. These guys know what they're doing, and you really knew your stuff. And so by the time I got around to talking to you, I'd already known a little bit about you, and you knew a little bit about me through social media. But by the time we actually had a conversation, it was sort of like when two dogs sniff each other's butts, and you can sort of tell, we sniffed each other's butts, and I sort of felt like right away, I'm like, oh yeah, this is the guy I want to talk to some more. So it was literally by the end of that podcast, and if you haven't listened to it, I encourage everyone to look it up. By the end of the podcast, we're like, yeah, let's do a podcast together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's pretty much the bread and butter of it. Yeah, I'd been looking for animators. I've been looking for people that were associated with King of the Hill, and they don't even really have to be associated with King of the Hill by the end of it all. Just people who are willing to have a conversation is what was the goal, and loosely based around King of the Hill. And searching through Twitter, generally when I see someone who's active, that's an industry professional, that's active on social media, that interacts with the audience, those are the people that generally are easy to talk to and easy to talk to. I mean by accessibility, they're accessible, and I appreciate you taking the time to reach out, and you even bobbled me for a little bit for a couple of months with the holidays and everything, and you still took the time to reach out to me even after I was probably so far down in your inbox from everything else. You even took the time to reach out to me and let me know that you were still wanting to be a part of the show, and I appreciate that. And so that's kind of brought us to the culmination of the animation conversation. And I wanted to kind of address the name real quick. So you could search the animation conversation, and you will find podcasts right now that are called the animation conversation, but they are dead podcasts. They're podcasts that no longer produce, and they are podcasts that honestly, the name the animation conversation won't have any weight other than the weight that we give the name. So sorry to anybody that chose that name prior to our creation of this podcast, but we are the animation conversation. So there you go.
That's right. We are the animation conversation, and
you can find the or duh animation conversation somewhere else, but this is the animation podcast, animation conversation podcast.
And none of those shows have me. So, and none of those shows have you.
No, neither. So they that actually, two industry professionals.
That actually brings me to, when you mentioned us doing the podcast together and King of the Hill and all that, obviously you're super duper into King of the Hill.
Absolutely.
But I'm curious to know, I feel like everybody, oh, no, wait, this is something I wanted to talk about first. Like, the reason it was so great that you reached out and the reason I made such an effort to, like, get back to you and stuff is one of the sort of particular odors that is attached to animation, if I could make a really bad metaphor, is that, for years and years and years, as an industry veteran, we would work on these shows. They'd come out, and apart from getting ratings, we would have no idea what the audience reaction was. I've only been like really actively on social media for about the past year, and my goodness, it has been amazing to hear from people like you and just random people everywhere who have been like, oh my gosh, The Fairly Odd Parents changed my life, or oh my gosh, Invader Zim was the greatest show ever, oh my gosh, we love My Life as a Teenage Robot, or even, and then even some of the shows that I didn't think anybody really cared that much about. I've had people DM me on Twitter and be like, Chalk Zone was my absolute favorite thing ever, and you worked on it, and I just want you to know how much I appreciate it. And it's like, again, for someone my age, I'm 52, when I really started making my bones in the industry, there was no feedback like that. You just had no idea.
Oh,
the
ratings
came back, and you're like, oh, look, we're getting decent ratings. That's nice, but there's no sort of human connection. So once I got into social media, got to meet people like you and other people that I've come into contact with on social media. It's just kind of amazing to be able to talk directly to the people that I've been working for this whole time.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's great. That's awesome. And it's funny that you mentioned that because this morning, my sister, she listens to my King of the Hill podcast. She's probably one of the most faithful listeners that I have. My sister, she's she's my younger sister, 6 years younger than me. And she's super supportive of every creative endeavor I've ever decided to do ever in my life. If I've ever had a supporter bigger than her, it'd be my mom. But other than that, my sister's pretty diehard. So she texted me this morning and she said, I just finished listening to the interview with F. I finally got caught up. She was a little bit behind. She finally got caught up. And she said, I listened to your interview with F because I've been talking to her about you. And of course, getting some of her insights because she is one of my my backboards as far as my ideas and stuff like that. And I was kind of bouncing ideas off her about the animation conversation and stuff like that. Well, she had texted me this morning and said, you didn't tell me he worked on American Dragon. And that was one of the shows that she really enjoyed. She really enjoyed American Dragon, but she also really enjoyed all three of the other ones that you did as far as Chalk Zone, My Life as a Teenage Robot, and Fairly Odd Parents,
Yeah, we got to do a whole show someday on American Dragon, because even though I did do a long sort of Twitter thread about my experience with American Dragon, there are still more stories to tell, and that's one of the things you can expect from this podcast, if you've enjoyed any of my, deep dive Twitter threads, you're still going to want to listen to this because I'm going to go into details here that I couldn't have gone into there. But yeah, again, this business of being able to sort of reach out and have one-on-one contact with fans and people like you and whatnot, it's just been a joy, and I want to thank everybody who's listening currently. And Rusty and I have been working on this really hard, and we are devoted to bringing you something a little bit different, little more, hopefully nuanced, and something that you'll enjoy for years and years to come. But I
Absolutely.
wanted to ask you, I wanted to ask you,
Okay.
obviously you're super into King of the Hill, but you're an encyclopedia of knowledge when it comes to animation. And I realized that when we talked about doing the podcast, you were like, oh, well, I'm going to hit the books. And that was the first thing you did. But I could tell already, even just in our first interview, that you know way more about the process and about the industry and everything than most people do. What got you into animation? Like, I'm going to assume that you probably liked cartoons as a kid,
Yeah,
but where did the turning point come?
yeah, it was definitely cartoons as a kid. So I'm actually a British national. Since you're learning about me, that's something you can learn about me. I'm actually a British national. I still hold the. I'm just a resident in the States. I'm not even a citizen. So
Wow.
as a small child, my great grandfather was born in 1903, and he was still alive when I was a kid. And
Mhm.
so I used to go to his house, and when we would go to his house, he always would put on Tom and Jerry. That was his big
Nice.
thing, was Tom and Jerry. And
Oh,
that's why there was a question somebody had asked on the Twitter already. So we do have Twitter already set up for those of you that don't know. It's Animation Convo. So you can go over there and check us out. So there was that, kind of just started the love of cartoons. It started with Tom and Jerry and just the simple cat and mouse. To me, it was the music, it was the sounds, it was just everything, and it didn't need dialogue. It was just so entertaining, and I never had to hear somebody speak. And that's really rare for kids these days. Like, even when I was a
yeah.
kid growing up, a lot of kids didn't like Tom and Jerry. A lot of my friends didn't like the cartoons that didn't have any speaking and things like that. They wanted the action. They wanted they wanted the dialogue and the conversation and stuff. But I didn't really care. I really liked all the noises and the sounds and stuff that it made. And I used to imitate sounds and stuff in class when I was a kid. I used to get in trouble all the time for making cartoon sounds and stuff. Yeah, so I guess that's like the origin point, is just being 3, 4, 5, 6 years old at my grandpa's house watching Tom and Jerry with him. It was just, I don't know, it was just one of those really emotional memories. I could just vividly remember sitting there watching some of the early Hanna-Barbera. For those of you that don't know, a lot of people don't know that Tom and Jerry is a
Yeah.
Hanna-Barbera production, one of
Yeah.
their very, very first creations that really got them into the spotlight.
Yeah. Yeah. It was in the same way that Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was kind of the thing that created the Walt Disney Studio. Like, it
Yeah.
was the success of that film upon which Walt built the empire.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
that's
Yeah.
why I worked on the Disney Studio lot for a few years. And the main building, the like head building where all the super important people exist, it's got a sculpture on the roof of it of the seven dwarfs holding up the ceiling or the roof of the building. And Walt commissioned that specifically to sort of show, hey, these are the ones who built this studio. Like, they held this up, and I thought that was really cool. And similarly, Tom and Jerry, you're right, that was Hanna-Barbera's. That was their big, sort of entry into the world of animation, because at the time, there was Disney and Warner Brothers, and that was kind of
That was
it.
it.
And there were
And they swallowed
others, here
studios
and there and
whole
whatnot.
too. There's a lot of, like, I've been doing a lot of the history on it, and if you had a studio, they were swallowing your studio whole. They
Absolutely,
swallowed
yeah, yeah.
studios left and right, and they captured literally some of the best early talent. The majority of the best early talent at some point or another was under Walt
Oh
Disney's
yeah.
regime. Yeah.
Well, and what was cool about Hanna-Barbera, and by the way, I mean, Tom and Jerry, they're that's a cartoon that if you want to be an animator, you just have to watch them. You have to learn from
Oh,
those
it's
because they're
awesome.
amazing.
It's such and again, that's why when the question was asked on the Twitter, what is your what is your favorite production studio? That's why Hanna-Barbera is my favorite production studio.
Yeah. Well, that's completely understandable. And what's, a lot of people will sort of point out that, towards once you got into the late 70s and stuff, Hanna-Barbera was really churning out some stuff. But beforehand, they were, and by the way, they turned that around. And once Fred Seibert took over, they wound up doing some really, truly amazing stuff again. But what a lot of people I don't feel like appreciate, and this is one of the things that sticks out in my mind is, um, you know, like we just said, they were competing with Disney and Warner Brothers, and what Hanna-Barbera seemed to do is, after they had sort of made their mark and everything, they sort of said, "Hey, we're going to do what these other studios aren't doing," and that was television. Everyone was like, "Oh, you can't do animation. You can't do a regular animated
Oh,
TV
they
series.
ruled
That's too
TV.
expensive."
Yeah, they ruled TV.
Yeah,
Scooby Doo. I mean,
yeah, and they found a way to do it, on a budget that could accommodate television. And you have to hand it to them. They changed cartoons forever. I mean, especially with things like the Flintstones. Nobody had ever, seen anything like that before. And
yeah,
so
absolutely.
that was a primetime show.
Yeah, and that's where my son actually is a huge Scooby Doo fan. So going back to like animation and love of animation, my son is encyclopedic knowledge of Scooby Doo. He could listen to the first few bits of dialogue and he knows the entire show. He could tell you the plot,
Wow.
he could tell you who's this, who's that, and he has nicknames for each
Wow.
episode too. He doesn't know what the actual title of the episode is, but he's like, "Oh, it's that ghost, or it's this guy, or
Right.
it's that guy."
Wow.
And that's for every version of Scooby, like every rendition of Scooby Doo. He really, really loves Scooby Doo.
That's
His nickname is Scoobers. He loves Scooby Doo so much. So
Wow. That is crazy. See, once I reached a certain age, I sort of parted ways with Scooby-Doo. But I gotta say, I had no idea. Like, man, the Scooby-Doo fans, they are
massive.
rabid.
Massive. It's a
They
massive fan base. It's insane how many people that Scooby Doo. Well, Scooby Doo started. My mom remembers watching Scooby Doo as a kid in the what was it, late '60s, and my son
Mhm.
is now 12 in 2023, and that's a show that he watched as a kid too. So it's just the
Yeah.
longevity of it is it's timeless.
Oh,
A lot of those cartoons
yeah.
are timeless cartoons that could be watched in any generation, and that's what's so beautiful about a lot of that production is around that time frame is you can go back and still watch these cartoons and they're still like relevant to
Yeah.
little kids.
Now, let me ask you this, and then after you answer this question, I promise I'll answer your question because
Okay.
it pertains to the question you
No, you're
asked me
good. You're good.
originally. So very long ago.
No, we're having a great
When
conversation.
did you understand? When did you understand the difference between cartoon animation? Like
Uh,
when did it
probably around like
sort of?
preteen age, probably around like
Yeah.
11 or 12. I started getting interested. I was in taking art classes and stuff in school, so I started getting interested in like how do they do this?
Uh-huh.
I knew it was hand drawn. I knew at that point. At that point, I understood the basic, animation, like a flip book and stuff like that. I understand like those basic
Right.
kind of things. So I understood at that point that somebody's drawing thousands of drawings somewhere and doing this. As far as like
Mhm.
the equipment and the technology and stuff that's being used, I got really interested in some of that stuff around. I guess the early access to the internet. So about
Hmm.
2001, 2002, I was about 11 or 12 around that time. So around that
Right.
time, I now have information at my fingertips. So I'm looking up and researching all kinds of stuff that I now have information that I could look up for. So one of them was animation, and I got to looking at
Right.
all the early technologies like the theatre, the I don't know how to say it in French, but it's optical theater in French.
Mm-hmm.
And I started looking at some of the early stuff and the early technologies, and it was just fascinating to me that these massive pieces of equipment that were mechanically operated was how they were projecting
Yeah.
movies in these projectors. And you would go and you would spend money to sit there for 3 minutes, and that was it, and then you would leave. So it was like
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
crazy to think that it was such a nuanced, fascinating piece of technology at the time that it came out, that people would literally dress up in like the highest fashion of the era, and they would sit in
Yeah.
these dark, damp, very, very rudimentary theaters and watch these little flip books is what they amounted to at the end of the
Yeah.
day. These big, huge,
Yeah.
carousel like things, and it would spin, and
Yeah.
then once it did its whole cycle, it was over and you went home. So I don't know, I got interested in that, I guess. Yeah, it's about my preteen age, man, and I started diving into a lot of the actual animators and what they were doing physically, like what you had to do as far as drawing each drawing, and then the cells and everything, and then actual film drawn animation, people drawing on the film. And I don't know, it was fascinating to me how fast it moved. Once the fire was lit in the late 1800s, by 1930
Mm-hmm.
you had the technology pretty much set until computer animation.
Right. Well, now see, that's where it ties into my own, the question you asked me earlier in my own experience, because you asked when I got interested in doing animation.
Yeah.
Again, the first 5 to 10 years of my life were spent, not just watching cartoons. I would worship cartoons, like,
Yeah.
and this was back in the day, and I sort of weep for the fact that this kind of doesn't exist anymore. The whole getting up at the crack of dawn on Saturday morning and turning on the TV, waiting for the test pattern to go away and for cartoons to begin. Like,
Do they
that
even
was
market
just,
cartoons for Saturday morning anymore? Is that even like a thing that's even done in the industry? I don't even
heck if
think.
I know. No, I don't think
I don't
anybody
even
thinks
think.
in those terms. Like,
Yeah,
nobody writes the show going, oh, kids are going to be watching this on Saturday morning with a bowl of cereal,
because nobody
which
watches
is
like traditional TV anymore. It's on its way out period anyway. With all of
yeah,
these social, with all these streaming sites, why would you wait till Saturday morning to watch cartoons when I could watch
right,
cartoons
exactly,
24/7? And you could watch with HBO Max and all of the stuff they have offered now too. You could literally
yeah,
watch almost 80 to 70 years worth of cartoons and
yeah,
never
completely.
have to wait for Saturday morning.
See, and that's why it was so special to me. I had
Yeah.
to wait for it, and I had to, I would anticipate it all
Yeah,
week
no, same
long.
here. I grew up in
And
that era too. Well, I mean, I didn't grow up in waiting for the TV actually
you're,
to come on. We had a
yeah,
signal all the time, but I remember waiting on Saturday morning, waking up as early as possible to catch the first cartoon that airs in
yeah.
the morning, kind of thing. After the
See,
infomercials.
and for me, I grew up in the '70s, and I'm very vocal about this. That, for me anyway, the '70s were friggin' horrible. Like, I hated growing up in the '70s. They were
Yeah,
Everything was tan corduroy, and
yeah,
everyone was depressed, and everyone was bummed, and there wasn't a lot of optimism in the world. Everyone was too busy trying to be groovy, and I had no interest in being groovy. So for me, the anticipation of the Saturday morning cartoons starting was just, it was, I would meditate on them all week long, and then literally just worship at their altar when they came on Saturday mornings. And I really do believe that it's at some point I kept thinking, if I watch these faithfully enough, I will become a cartoon and I'll get sucked into that world. I can leave the '70s behind, and I'll become a cartoon character. Because famously, one of the little traits I have, I'm sort of the original cosplayer, because I was well known in my neighborhood growing up. Every day I would dress up as a different cartoon character, and I would stay in character all day. And one of my parents always used to love to tell the story. We went on this camping trip, and for the duration of that camping trip, I was underdog. That's just kind of all there was to it. I was
yeah.
underdog.
I see the campaign.
And
John Fountain revive should be able to
yes,
revive. What is it? What's the hashtag?
It's let John Fountain reboot Underdog.
There you go. Hashtag y'all go set that
Hashtag let
afire.
John Fountain reboot Underdog. Sign the petition.
There you
And
go.
anyway, we went on this camping trip. My parents set up our tents and everything like that. And we're this, very standard issue, corn-fed Midwestern, golly gosh gee type little family, and we're going on our family camping trip. And then right next to our campsite, just a huge mass of Hell's Angels set up, and they were hooting it up, and of course to my parents this was terrifying, and they were hooting it up and just causing a ruckus, not doing anything bad per se, but just
Yeah.
they scared my parents. So I did what any budding young superhero would do. I put on my underdog costume and I went over to these guys, and I'm about 4 years old, and I went over to the Hells Angels, and my parents didn't see me walk away. They turned around at one moment and they're like, "Oh my gosh, where's John?" And they turn and look over, and I'm over there telling the Hells Angels, "Hey, you guys better be good because I'm underdog. And if
That's
you're
awesome.
naughty, I'll use my superpowers on you." And man, they loved it. They just thought that was the greatest thing ever. And by the way, made peace between my family and the Hells Angels.
That's awesome.
But I remember, they wound up sort of interrogating me because they were so fascinated by this insane little kid who had walked over to their campsite. And I remember one of them asking me at one point, "Hey, so, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And this is the part that I absolutely clearly remember. I remember looking up at this big, burly Hell's Angel and saying, "I'm underdog." It's like, why are you asking me this stupid question?
Yeah, like, is it obvious?
Yeah. I'm underdog. How clear? Because I was in full underdog regalia that I'd made myself, and I was like, how stupid are you for asking this question?
Yeah.
So that was my relationship with cartoons for probably the first 5-10 years of my life. Now, fast forward, and I know this is a long story, but
No, you're good.
fast forward to watching a little show called The Wonderful World of Disney. And again, keep in mind, this was the 70s. This was before, we were knocking on the door of the 80s. But this was before the internet.
Yeah, it was
this
before
was before
ABC
you could
Kids.
just go look stuff
yeah.
up.
See, I was
Yeah.
big on ABC Kids. So there's some YouTube guys out there that post a lot of VHS stuff, and I'm real big into watching a lot of that. It's just as background noise, and they'll have like whole blocks of like Saturday morning cartoons from like the 90s and stuff like that. And I don't know, hearing one Saturday morning, I just love it so much. Yeah.
Yeah. So now The Wonderful World of Disney was another sort of almost documentary style Disney show that would air in prime time. And sometimes it would be like, today we follow the life cycle of the banana slug, or today we see how, walnuts are harvested. It was always a little bit of everything. But they had an episode where, of course, Walt hosted it, where he's like, "I'm going to show you how we make cartoons." And I was like, "Oh, this is fantastic," because
awesome.
I had already, decided at that point, by this time I'm knocking on the door of 10 or so, and it's obvious that I'm not going to become a cartoon. So I figured the next best thing is to be a cartoonist. So I'm like, "Oh, fantastic. Let's see how cartoons are made." And they show it, and they show this poor soul just doing page after page after page after page after page of drawings that looked really, really similar, just to make Mickey Mouse do that. And I'm like, "No, thank you. I'll have none of that. That looks way too hard. I want none of that." So despite the fact that, heretofore, my entire life, I was like, "Oh, I love cartoons," when I saw how they were actually made, I was like, "Oh no, I want no part of that." So what I wound up focusing on was, one of my favorite cartoons growing up was both cartoon and comic strip, was Peanuts with Snoopy and Charlie Brown.
I love Peanuts. Yeah, that was one of my favorite cartoons.
And I had sort of figured out, oh, Charles Schultz, this guy, made this comic strip, and based on the success of the comic strip, cartoons were made of it. So I was like, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna create stuff, and I'll do it through a comic strip. And when my comic strip is big and famous, an animation studio will animate this stuff for me, and I'll never, have to partake in any of it.
Live vicariously through an animator.
Yeah. So for the next, 20 something years, that was my attitude about animation. I still loved cartoons all through college. When I was in college, that's when stuff like Ren and Stimpy and Rocko's Modern Life came out,
Oh,
and I was like, "Oh
beautiful,
man,
beautiful
cartoons are getting
stuff.
good again." Because there was a whole bunch of garbage that came out in the 80s that's where you had stuff like Rubik the Amazing Cube and
Yeah, you got all the
just all
toy.
kinds of
It was all the it was the big marketing stuff. Once they realized they could sell toys to kids based on the cartoon
yeah,
shows, you got a lot of stuff, and there was some good ones that did come out of it. But of course, there was a lot of crap.
sure.
There was a lot of crap.
Oh,
Transformers.
there was a lot of
Transformers will
garbage
be the one that I
and
like out of that. Transformers is one of my favorite cartoons from that
absolutely.
toy cartoon era. I'm a really big fan of the early CGI Beast Wars Transformers. That's
Mhm.
probably one of my favorite cartoons. I remember watching it on Fox Kids real early in the morning before I got on the school
Yeah.
bus.
See
Yeah.
the original G1 Transformers. That was I was at an age. It was probably around 1985, 86 or whatever, and I was about 15 or 16 when that came out. And so, at that age, being a teenager and running home to watch cartoons was just not something you wanted to advertise. So because, you're trying to get girls to notice you and that sort of thing, and the last thing they want to hear about is, this episode where Megatron stole Optimus Prime's right arm. They're not interested in that. So I was watching that cartoon, but I was keeping it really on the down low. And the original Transformers was one of my favorite cartoons, and so my point is, I was still watching cartoons. I loved animation. I admired the hell out of the people who were involved in it. But for many, many, many years, in fact, all through college, up until about the age of 25 or 26, I never aspired to have anything to do with animation or cartoons at all.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
No. I was just saying. Yeah. I was just.
So
Yeah.
it wasn't until somewhere around when I was probably like 25, 26, I was getting ready to graduate from college. Yes, I was 26 when I graduated from college. And there was a small production studio in my hometown of Kalamazoo, and they would do the local commercials that you'd see with, the car dealerships and mattress places and stuff like that. And they literally had a tiny corner in the back of their warehouse where they produced animation. And they had seen by that time I had been doing a comic strip for the school for the my college newspaper
Okay.
that had become sort of strangely popular around town. Like I was a local celebrity, so they saw that and they're like, "Hey, do you want to do some character designs for us?" And I was like, "Not really." And they're like, "Well, no, but here's what we're going to pay you." And again, by Kalamazoo standards, circa 1994 or whatever, 95, it was good money. So I was like, "Oh, yeah, okay, I'll do some of that." And then I got in there and they're like, "Well, how would you like to make a little more money and do a little bit of animation?" I was like, maybe. And so, but bit by bit, they kind of coaxed me into it. And then once I saw something that I had created move, that was it. That was
Yeah, it
chum in the
changed it.
water
Yeah,
for
no,
me.
I can imagine. Like after swearing that you weren't going to do it because of all the work that it took. Once you realized and got in there and did a little bit of it and saw one of your characters move, yeah, I could
Yep.
imagine that was like it was like a almost. I don't want to compare it to this, but probably almost like the birth of a child. How like emotional that
Yeah.
moment might have been.
No.
It's just like this was a non living being on a screen or on a piece of paper, and now you see
Yeah.
it and it's moving and it's breathing and it's emotional. That yeah, I couldn't imagine. That's crazy. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, no, it was, and I didn't expect to have that reaction. I knew what it was gonna, sort of wind up looking like, but I didn't expect it. It was exactly what you mentioned, and I didn't expect to have that reaction at all. And not just move, but speak and sing and dance and just all this kind of stuff. And so, you know, from that point on, I was kind. And by the way, this was at a time when comic strips, especially newspaper comics, they were on their way out.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
had been doing a comic strip for a long time, trying to get it syndicated. Nobody was syndicating anything new. And so I was like, well, shoot, I'm about to be done with college and I got to have a job. So there are way worse things. than, sitting in the back of this warehouse of this small production company doing little bits of animation. So that's how I fell into it. And we'll go into a deeper dive one day, because the story of how I went from that little warehouse to, Disney is kind of a tale in and of itself,
Yeah, no,
filled with
yeah.
all kinds of
Yeah, so there you go.
craziness.
Make sure
But
you tune into the animation conversation, because there's going to be deep dives and more. You're going to get
yeah,
behind the scenes industry stuff. So here
yeah.
we go.
My story of how I went from point A to point Z is so wrought with both tragedy and victories and all this stuff that for a while in the early aughts, I was spending a great deal of my time and mostly getting paid to go around from college to college, giving lectures, basically just telling this story. Because it really is sort of a rags to riches kind of tale. Because when I got into animation, everyone that I was sat next to at Klasky Chupo on the Wild Thornberries, that was my first big show. They had all either gone to, Cal Arts or some other, Sheridan, or really, really prestigious, or even semi-prestigious
Yeah,
animation colleges.
and you
I
were
didn't know
just
those things even existed.
coming in as Mr. Kalamazoo, just
I
fresh off the
absolutely.
boat. Yeah,
I was
fresh off the
coming in
boat.
as this horn shucking boonhick from the middle of nowhere. When I would tell people I was from Kalamazoo, they'd be like, "That's not a real place." I'm like, "Yes, it is." And by the way, so is Walla Walla, Washington, and Cucamonga. So, um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I was placed with all these people who had gone to school for animation. So, that just kind of made my story that much more sort of inspirational. So yes, if you're listening and you're a student of animation, you're going to want to tune into this show every single time, because eventually we will do a whole show where I tell that whole tale. And like I said, it was an amazing journey.
Yeah, these
So
are the kind of
anyway,
conversations you're going to be able to find here on the Animation Conversation. So we're going to be doing this not just with F here, but I'm gonna try to give some really good interviews for you guys that are in a different light than what some of these people are probably used to out of interviews. Because I'm not really concerned a lot with what I mean. I want to know what they've got going on, obviously, but I'm more interested in everybody's origin. I'm really, because we all come from somewhere, we all come from somebody, and we all have a unique path on how we got to wherever we're at. Some of us were born from means, some of us weren't, and it's interesting to see, how people's pathways led them to where they're at, and just like their creative processes and things like that. It's really fascinating to me. A lot of the people that we're going to get to talk to, and a lot of the things that they've created, and how much of it I've consumed is what blows my mind. It's like, man, I've almost watched everything that this guy's ever made. Like I've literally seen his entire career from start to finish through the eyes of his characters in animation. So, that's kind of stuff you're going to get here from the Animation Conversation for sure. I guess another question that I kind of had that was similar to like your origin point. So what were I don't want to do like top fives or nothing like that, because I think that's kind of silly, but what were what are the cartoons that not only necessarily were your favorite, because some of my things that are my favorites are not necessarily the most influential things. What was like your favorite cartoons, and then what was necessarily the one that was most influential to like your work and how you design characters?
when I'm asked that question, it's sort of like all roads lead to Bugs Bunny. Like
Bugs
Bugs
Bunny.
Bunny is always for me. Bugs Bunny is the goat.
Chuck Jones, right? Isn't that
Um,
Chuck Jones?
well, he was one of many. It was Chuck Jones, Fritz Freeling, and a whole host of other directors. But Chuck Jones really made Bugs Bunny his. I mean,
Yeah.
I shouldn't put it like that, but he put a spin on Bugs Bunny that was kind of all his own, and he was one of those first sort of animation directors whose name was known. You saw the name Chuck Jones, and you're
Yeah.
like, oh, there's Chuck Jones. Um, so I mean, as a character, Bugs Bunny was just always he was always hilarious. And I mean, prior to that, as a little kid, my favorite cartoon character was Mickey Mouse, because Mickey Mouse is, of course, delightful and accessible, and really really palatable
I have a quick
to a
question,
young
a
kid.
quick side caveat question about Mickey Mouse. How do you
Yeah.
feel about Mickey Mouse coming up for his what do you call it? His release into the public domain next year.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I, I can't possibly hope. I can't possibly not hope that Disney just somehow manages to retain the rights to it.
I
It's
feel
one of
like
those
they're going
things
to
that,
fight for it in court, probably. And if they don't fight for it, what do you feel about co-producing a horror movie animated with Mickey Mouse? No, I'm just kidding.
yeah,
I'm just kidding.
I'd never do it. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, there's and that's why it's funny that I'm sort of pushing to reboot Underdog is because I would almost always rather see people come up with something new than
Absolutely.
necessarily reboot something that existed. But I do feel like Underdog is due.
Yeah. Well, I personally think that.
Mickey Mouse has enjoyed so many different incarnations.
Yeah.
Even if he does go into the public domain, I don't know why anybody would necessarily want to do that. And
Yeah.
even if they wanted to do R-rated parody or horror thing, it's like, let's face it, that kind of thing's already been done a million times. It's
Yeah.
all just been kind of in the underground realm. So,
Yeah.
I call me a shill, but I hope that they keep the rights to it.
Yeah. I could go either way. I don't really care either way. I just think that they need to stop suing people that are making fan stuff. I feel like the litigation on fan stuff sometimes is as long as I mean I understand like new things they create they want control of and stuff like that. But as Mickey Mouse is, he's over 100 years old nearly at this point. They've fought nail and tooth. So I feel like if there is a fan created thing, they've made multiples of billions of dollars off of Mickey Mouse at this point. So if a fan was to create something and make a couple bucks off of it, them coming in and suing that person for more money than they even made off of it, I don't know. I feel like it stifles creativity and to a certain extent. Like I totally agree with like the lifespan of someone's art and them being able to make a profit off of their art and other people not being able to profit off of their art. But at a certain point, how much money have you made? How much is other people's creativity being stifled because they want to because they're wholly inspired by something that you did or something like that? I don't know. I feel like there's a line at some point that it becomes like, okay, well, we've made we made an entire industry off of this character, and we've made all this money. Now, it's kind of like with Nintendo too. Nintendo stifles a lot of fan created modifications to their games, as far as like the modding community. They'll mod some of their Pokemon games and stuff like that, and they're really really big about suing and cease and desist letters and stuff like that. And I think it stifles like a younger generation, because it's usually younger people that they see this old IP and they're like, well, I really like it, but I want to make it for me, make it for this generation kind of thing. And I feel like in the essence of creativity and nurturing creativity in young people, I feel like a lot of those things should be kind of modified maybe in how the laws are written.
Well, but here's the thing. Well, and you say the laws, and that's what it really boils down to. It
Yeah,
has
it's the
way
laws.
less to do with the studio saying, we don't want anyone making fan cartoons. It's the way, this is how it was explained to me. So I could have this completely wrong. But the way it was
Mm-hmm.
explained to me was that if you own a property and somebody does either a parody or a fan film or anything like that, and they make money off it, they are suddenly in a legal position to claim ownership if you don't fight them. So it has way more to do with
Yeah, it's the
the
laws.
legal system and the way copyrights are set up
Yeah.
than anything else. I don't think it's
That's the laws.
necessarily.
Which a lot of the copyright
Yeah,
laws, though, that's a conversation that we should have. That's definitely something that
yeah,
we should definitely have a conversation on. A lot of the copyright laws are lobbied by Disney lobby. So Disney
sure.
has lobbied, because a lot of the current like public domain laws, because it used to be, X amount of years, and then it just grew to where it's like 90 years now, and a lot of that was done by Disney lobbying to keep Mickey Mouse safe. That was pretty much a lot of the legislation that's currently on the books was in the effort to keep Mickey Mouse from ever reaching the public domain. So I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with that.
Yeah, we have to do a whole show just on that, to be sure.
Yeah, yeah,
What's
yeah.
kind of interesting
Absolutely.
to sort of dovetail onto this whole point is, I recently made a decision to start taking a bunch of the properties because I spent about 15 years in Los Angeles, and I probably sold a half a dozen shows. I sold about 6 shows. Well, that is a half dozen. I sold 6 shows, created one pilot, got to storyboard on her, and then got to other various positions on other things. And only one of those out of literally probably 50 or 60 things that I pitched, only one of them actually made it on the air. Now, that doesn't have really anything necessarily to do with the quality of my ideas as it does, they weren't right for the time or something else got picked up or whatever. But I've been sitting on all this stuff for, the past, another 15 years or so or whatever. And I've been thinking to myself, I've got at least 3 or 4 of these show concepts that I've created that I really think are worthy of an audience. And so I sort of decided to myself, do I want to be precious about these ideas, or do I want to see the stories out there in the world? And I kind of decided I want to see the stories out there in the world.
The rest of us do too.
And one of the things I'm doing now is I'm using social media to recruit other directors and other creators and other, specifically young artists like me who had no actual work experience in the animation field, and saying, here's my idea, here's my concept, take it, run with it, and let's get it out there. And yes, it's still going to say created by John Fountain, but I really sort of decided, I don't need to, I'm not Walt Disney, I don't have a Mickey Mouse. So why do I need to be so precious about these characters? It's much more important to me that the stories get out there, because I think they're good stories, than it is to, worry about, well, what if they bastardize your idea, or what if it's not as good as it could have been if you would have just done it, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I've kind of reached a point where I have so many ideas that I'm no longer afraid or no longer so incredibly protective. Like, I'm not a helicopter parent to my properties
ideas
anymore.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That's one of the things I've become very interested in doing lately. I'm it's
we're
it's a great position
interested in it
to be in,
too.
because I don't need the money. I'm not out to like get rich off any of them. I'm not out even to necessarily make them a hit. I just want to tell the stories that I have, and this gives young animators and people who don't have it, who maybe have the passion and even have the skill, but don't have any, real life work experience, to take these things and get some real life work experience out of them. And that's, one of the things, when I said we were going to be recording this podcast, one of the things people always want to know is, how do I break in the industry? And unfortunately, one of the toughest hurdles to get over that is required to break into the industry is real life work experience. And it's the hardest thing to get, because nobody wants to hire you if you don't have any experience. And it's why when I moved to Los Angeles, even just having that rinky dink little,
it's still
corner of the warehouse experience,
because that's
enough to help me break in.
Yeah, that little corner of the warehouse that you're describing is how all of the top, like Walt Disney started in a little dank corner of a garage, you know what I mean? So all of the top animation all started in some dark, dank little room, starting in the 1800s with the early technologies and stuff. So, the best animation that we've experienced in life has all come from some guy that started sitting in a corner in some dark room. So there you go. So if you're in your basement at your mom's house and you're an animator, don't have faith. Have faith in yourself.
Well, again, that's the thing. We live in an age now where, like I said, I took one of my most beloved properties today that I created and pitched, and it almost got picked up at Cartoon Network, where I just handed it off to a director today, and I said, can you realistically, can you make this? And she's like, yes. And I'm like, then go do it.
Yeah,
And
the artisan
like I said,
world is crazy now with the internet. The artisanal world is, and
yeah.
it's not just with animation in general. It's with all facets of everything in life. You've got a guy that I watch on YouTube that does YouTube videos on colonial living. He does he does colonial cooking, and then you've got
Yeah.
people who are, and this is guys that are like in their 20s. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That are doing this stuff.
Yeah.
This isn't like 60 and 70-year-old men that are doing some colonial stuff from stories they heard from their great great grandfather or something. You know, this is like kids that are doing this stuff,
Right.
and it's great. I love it. I love that you could get studio quality productions from a group of
Yes.
young 19, 20-year-old kids that are just
Yeah.
doing it from computers at home because they have had access to these technologies most of their lives. They like, there was animation app that my son was playing on tablets somewhere in like 2010
Yeah.
or 2011, and
Hmm.
he wasn't interested in it. But I was just thinking in my mind, if he would have like took fire to that like he has other hobbies, like
Yeah.
he could have been, he could have been like almost a professional level animator by the time he even graduated high school if he just did it every day. It's just insane that access that we have to all these things that necessarily wasn't available for earlier generations of
Yeah.
kids.
Well, and that's kind of why I've decided that I've sort of said, oh wow, this technology is sitting right in front of me. Why don't I let other people? Because for me, it's never been about animation, and it's never been about storyboarding. It's never been about directing. It's been about storytelling. Animation is the vessel with which I tell stories, but the story to me is the important part. It's not the storyboarding process or the writing process or the drawing process. You'll hear me say time and time again that I consider my drawing to be serviceable at best. Whenever I'm in a position to do so, I like to hire people who can draw much better than me, and that's a lot of people. And so now I've sort of decided, the story is what matters to me. So as long as people know that the story is coming from me, why not take advantage of this
Absolutely.
technology that we have in front of us
Well, that's
and let the
why.
stories be told?
Yeah. Well, that's why when you posited the question about one of your personal IPs, you had said on Twitter, should I shop it? Should I do an indie animated with the self-animated indie studio style, or should I create a webcomic? And that's why I said all
Mhm.
three when I said what I said. I said all three.
Yeah, yeah,
And,
yeah, I saw
and,
that.
and the reason why I said all three and is because you should like selling yourself short by putting all your eggs in one basket. I think that having the webcomic, having like some small animation done, and then shopping all of those things out, I think that is that, because you have the webcomic, you have a little bit of animation already done for the show, and then you shop it, and I feel like it's uh, you couldn't go wrong.
Here's the thing though, and here's what I'm going to say to that, because it's
Yeah.
funny you bring that up, because when I put that as an, because I did a poll, should I
Uh-huh.
do it this way, this way, or this way? And when I put pitch it around to the studios again, I put that on the poll, sort of saying to myself, I'm not going to pitch anything to the studios again. Because here's the thing, and by the way, that one's losing by a mile.
Oh yeah, it
The
is.
the thing
I
is,
saw how unpopular that opinion was.
yeah, I spent a good 10 years of my life pitching stuff to the studios. And by the way, I'm not bitter about it. I'm not, like, it was a great experience. I learned a
Yeah.
lot from it. And it was in that environment, living in Los Angeles, literally driving from studio to studio, pitching shows, one show getting this far, another show getting that far. It was a great experience. I loved it. And it put me in a place where I just kept having to come up with new ideas and create new stuff. And it was great. It was so invigorating and fun. But I'm past that point now.
Yeah.
The development process, they call it development hell for a reason. The development process within a studio, it takes forever. You don't make any money, and they really, really, mess with your IP. They mess with your story. And My feeling is, and again, I have a great relationship with all the studios I work for. You know, if I wanted to pitch something to Disney, I could pitch something to Disney. If I wanted to pitch something to Nickelodeon, I could do it like that. My feeling is I don't miss the pitching process anymore.
Oh, absolutely,
I
yeah.
I miss the storytelling process. So I want to get my stories out there. Nickelodeon, Disney, Warner Brothers, they all know how to find me. If they're interested in my stuff, they'll see it on YouTube, they'll see it online, and they'll knock on my door.
Oh,
And if they
absolutely,
do,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
great. And if they don't, what I'm really grateful for in this stage in my career is I don't need them. I love them because I worked for all of them at one point or another, and I have nothing but sort of a good relationship with all of them. And obviously, if one of them came knocking on my door and we said, "Hey, we saw this, we think it's great, let's develop it," I'd be like, "Yeah, sure, let's do it." But I love being in a position where I can sort of dictate my own terms again because, like I said, I don't need it.
Fair enough. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Fair enough. I can see that. And you know, your web comic blows up, your indie studio animated cartoon blows up, then yeah, if they don't come a knocking, someone's coming a knocking. If it's that good of
Yeah.
some
Well,
studio or
and
somebody will talk to you. Absolutely.
like I said, one of the first things I'm going to do if my little sort of incubator project takes off is find someone to replace me. Because, like I said, when it comes, what's important to me are the stories. So if the stories are out there, I'm happy. When it comes to absolutely everything else, I don't need to be famous. I don't need to have my name on absolutely, everything. And goodness knows, I don't need to be the one doing all the work. So, like I said, I'm very happy to let other people, take credit, take the bows and whatnot, as long as the stories are getting out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm ready to see some of this stuff and get to see some behind the scenes stuff on that, and maybe even be involved in it. If you need any involvement, I don't know what I would
Oh yeah,
do, but
yeah. It's
anything you need, I'm
really
here. I'm a resource.
I feel like between this podcast and everyone that has reached out to me on social media and the sort of everything that we're creating here, the world is going to be our oyster. And one of the things I want to do with this podcast is I want to do little animations of you and I having these conversations. So,
I think that would be
um,
wonderful. Yeah, I think that
no,
would be great for the fans. That would be
yeah,
some good stuff for the social medias and stuff. That'll be great for the TikToks. So I think I might save that
yeah.
for the TikTok videos and the YouTube shorts and stuff like that. I think that would be great for that. Uh, in I got one more question as we wind down. We've got
Okay,
about 10 or 15 minutes so here left. So the question that I have for you, and this is mainly for fans, our current fans and future fans, our Twitter analytics have been pretty wild for a brand new Twitter. So like people are really tapping in, following,
oh yeah.
checking everything out. People are really interested in what we both have to say. I've had a few of my fans from Bois. You can check that out at roguemedianetwork.com. It is BWAAAKOTH, Bois, King of the Hill. You can check that out over at roguemedianetwork.com, which is where we will also be at, as well as on roguemedianetwork.com. But you'll be able to find us on all social medias. I'll have a YouTube page for all of our videos and stuff once we get that far. But my last quick question here, or however long it takes to answer, is what advice, if you have any at all, for aspiring animators that want to break into the industry, and what words of advice do you have for young animators that maybe they don't aspire to be a part of a major studio? What advice do you have in general for anybody that wants to be in animation?
Well, like I said, one of the toughest things there's two things. There's wanting to make cartoons and there's wanting to be in the animation industry. If
Absolutely.
you want to be in the animation industry, job one, go on Twitter and look up my storyboarding tutorials and read them. Because I don't care if you want to be a character designer, I don't care if you want to be a background designer. It goes
That's
through the process
that's at
of
Fountain
creating
Cartoons, right? At Fountain Cartoons.
at Fountain Cartoon, I think.
Cartoon.
Um,
Well, just if you put cartoon and it doesn't pop up, put the S on there.
yeah,
But
yeah. No, it's. I'm looking at it now. It's at Fountain cartoon.
There you go, at
Um,
Fountain Cartoon.
and just do a search for storyboarding tutorial. I also my first long form tutorial was on how to create and pitch a show. You should read that as well. Those should be your first two steps. Your second step should be doing what I did, which is get some real world work experience. Now, I'm creating an incubator system to sort of help people out, but if you don't wind up working for me, you got to find somebody who's going to give you some real work experience. So if your goal is the industry, then the first thing you need to get is some experience. And I hate to say it, but that probably involves working for free or working on stuff that's not very much fun or working on every town has a little production studio that does local commercials. Seek them out. Ask them if you can intern. Ask them if you can volunteer. Just make yourself impossible to ignore. That's if you want to break into animation, because once you get experience, once you get actual work experience and show that you can meet a deadline, do the work that you were told, do revisions, all that stuff. Once you've proven that you can do that, you'll have a much easier time breaking into the actual industry. If what you want to do is make cartoons, just make them. Don't worry about the legalities of it. Don't be precious about it. Don't go, well, I'm on my 10th draft of my first script. No, don't be precious about it. Just do it. Do it, get it done, pop it up there. I did that with I had thought for years about doing a YouTube channel, and I kept thinking, well, I should do it this way or I should do it that way. And and I spent so much time worrying about it that I was like, I'm never going to get this done because I'm overthinking it. I'm way too much up in my head. So I'm just going to create a YouTube channel, throw up whatever I got. Every now and then I'll put up something new. If it catches, it catches. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And that is, if your goal is to make cartoons and it's all about just making the cartoons, just do it. Don't overthink it. Don't try and make it perfect. That is one of the biggest mistakes I see young creators making. Is they'll contact me and they'll be like, "Will you read my pitch? This is like my 10th draft, and I'm trying to get it just right." And it's like, don't get it just right. Let yourself make mistakes.
Well, I feel like a lot of that getting things right, you don't even know what you're doing to get it right. So just do, and then see what happens as you do. You got to do first to know where it's like a benchmark. You have to know where you're at to see what you have to work on. So that's create with intention, but create, just create, just do it, just create.
It's why, and this goes full circle. I was happy you wanted to do this podcast today because I was starting to get very much up in my head about, ooh, the first one has to be perfect. No, it doesn't.
Well, and that's the thing is it is perfect. It is perfect. It doesn't have to be, but it will be. That's the thing is. It doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be slick. That's the thing.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be slick.
I think a lot of people have had their fill of slick, and I certainly know I have. I like stuff that's raw and dirty and, not perfect and all that stuff. It's a lot easier to connect with because I'm not perfect.
Well, that's one of the things that me and Mike have kind of discovered with each other doing our King of the Hill podcast is through our fan base. They've let us know one of the things that they appreciate the most about me and Mike is the authenticity of the conversation and the feel of the conversation, because a lot of this is basically speaking to King of the Hill podcasts because there are a few in the atmosphere. The ones that have been and failed, a lot of their failures were around authenticity, or some of them started and something happened in life and they had to end, and I go back and I listen to their podcast and it was like, well, you were trying to force comedy on people. And it was a show about King of the Hill, but like 45% of it was the hosts trying to force their comedy on you, and then they would use the last half of the show to discuss King of the Hill. So it was just there was a lot of lack of authenticity. And then you had in the King of the Hill sphere, you had hosts of the podcast that had no relation to the Texas thing. You know, they had no perspective from what it would be like to be a Texans perspective of a show that was made about Texans. So that was one of the things that our fans tell us is the authenticity. So that was one of the reasons why, like, I've spitballed a podcast about animation. I've spitballed it to Mike a couple of times. I've spitballed it in my head a few times, but I never had a guest that I thought would bring, or another co-host rather, not a guest. I never thought that I never thought that I would be able to find a co-host that would bring a certain level of authenticity, not just the industry authenticity to it, like the industry part, but an authentic conversation. Like, cause I could have anybody on the other end of a screen with me talking, and I'm really good at talking to just about anybody at all on the other side of the screen, or, you know, face to face, but it's the authenticity thing again. You know, we're from two different parts of the United States and the world, but we come from a similar, you know, I don't live in a super rural area, but I grew up in a country way, and you grew up in a country way. So it's just the relatability, I think, is what I was looking for. And I was glad that we were able to have this rapport and get this thing finally kicked off. That's the first episode that we're on right now.
Well, and let me say this to the brand new listener, and let's face it, that's all we have right now are brand new listeners. As God is my witness, this is the promise I will make to you if you continue to listen to this podcast. I will never, ever, ever prepare for this show in any capacity whatsoever. I'm never going to have stuff written down. I'm never going to write jokes. You're just now, Mike, you're much more sort of studious than I am. So I'm happy that you're willing to be the guy to sort of do the research and do all that stuff.
Rusty.
Because I'm going to be the dancing monkey. You are never going to know what's going to come out of me, and I am never, ever going to prepare for this show. So what you're going to get is authentic Rusty and authentic F. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
I am studious. Yeah, I do a lot of study. So another thing that you'll find as we're wrapping everything up, I'm gonna go ahead and shout out all the social medias and everything. So another thing you'll find, I don't do it every day, because if I did it every day, then I won't have nothing for next year or the next year or the next year or the next year. Because somebody, my sister had actually mentioned to me that I had missed. It was like April 9th or April 10th. She said, "How could you miss the Family Guy anniversary? You didn't mention the Family Guy anniversary." And I was like, well, you know, I have a pretentious, a relationship of discontent with Seth MacFarlane. I love it. I love Family Guy, love American Dad, but they canceled King of the Hill for the Cleveland show, and the Cleveland show was
oh, wow.
It wasn't good. It was 4
That's
seasons. Yeah, well, it was 4 seasons. They canceled a show that had been on the air with guaranteed success for 12 years at that point.
Yeah.
They let them run for one more season. They actually cut the back half of season 13 short and put 4 episodes of King of the Hill into syndication.
Oh,
so the season finale of King of the Hill was thrown into syndication. It was never actually aired as a season finale. It was terrible. So
Rusty's
I forgot Family Guy on purpose.
Everybody, do not.
Yeah, I forgot Family Guy on purpose.
Now, see, this is great, because one of these days I'll tell on this show my Seth MacFarlane story, because I have a couple of them. And what's interesting is, and I'm going to put this out there now, you know, on my Twitter interactions, I have made a point of never, ever, ever, ever talking about stuff that I don't like. On Twitter, I will only ever talk about stuff that I like, because the fact of the matter is, there's enough people on Twitter talking about what they don't like.
Absolutely.
You know,
it brings positivity to the space.
Twitter needs any more of that. But if you listen to this show, you will hear about some stuff in the animation world that I don't like.
And you can pretty much find me anywhere not liking things. I'm one of those.
Well, and,
I'm one of those
to
people
sort
that
of
doesn't
to
like
sort
things
of
on the
tease
internet.
that, to sort of tease that thought, here's something I will say. Seth MacFarlane, the person, is a really nice guy.
Oh, I can imagine he's a like just from what you see of him in interviews and what you see of him on shows he hosts, he just seems like to me he's like the modern day, probably nicer than this guy, but he just reminds me of like a Frank Sinatra, just like a really slick,
Yeah.
like kind
Oh,
guy
that's
though.
quantifiable. He's got an amazing voice.
Yeah, love it. No, I do
But
love his voice.
that
Yeah,
that that sort of that
I
sort of
love his
gets
work. I'm not hating on American Dad or Family Guy. I love most of those shows. Most of the early parts of those shows, and like, cause you could see where like Seth MacFarlane probably like loses a bit of like, and it goes to like, oh well, Fox is like we want to shift this direction. You could kind of see that with like Family Guy and American Dad when they kind of shift a little bit for like for commercialization and commercial success, but I really, really don't like the Cleveland Show at all.
I'm gonna save my opinions on those individual shows
There we
for
go.
future
There we go for future
episodes of
episodes.
the animation
Yeah.
conversation because I have some interesting thoughts on those. So and
Oh,
you will only
I'm
hear them
ready for
here.
it. You will only hear them here. You hear that? You will only hear them here. Or maybe we'll put them behind a paywall. No, not yet. We're not that far yet.
Yep.
Okay, so I guess you got anything to plug before we sign off? You got anything you want to shout out or anything? Anybody that's any like young creators that are creating? I want to use this the last bit when we sign off for us to shout out or anything like that. Anything that we've seen lately as far as like recent animation you've watched or comic. I don't want this to just solely be about necessarily it is called the animation conversation, but I want to kind of group in comic books and video game animator, well, because video games is animation too, so I want to kind of like loop in a little bit of those things too at the end when we're wrapping up, like things that you've seen that are cool or shout out stuff.
Yeah, if you want to hear more about what I'm watching and what I'm into on a day-to-day basis, just go to at Fountain Cartoon on Twitter. That's where literally every day I'm on there 1,000 times a day, just kind of moving and shaking and trying to get stuff going, finding out what people are into, finding out what direction I should be going into next. I like to make myself really, really accessible. So yeah, just follow me at Fountain Cartoon. One of the ways that I'm trying to sort of launch these incubator projects that I'm trying to get going is through my YouTube channel. So if anybody wants to do me a great big favor and subscribe to at Fountains Pen Cartoons on YouTube, please just like, share, and subscribe because that's where I'm going to be, sort of hosting a lot of stuff, a lot of brand new stuff, not just by me, but of a lot of what I'm hoping will be, young, new, undiscovered talent. So again, on Twitter, it's at Fountain Cartoon, and on YouTube, it's at Fountains Pen Cartoons. And with that, I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to say, Rusty, this has been great. I can't wait to do more of these. And by the way, everybody, I've said this before, and I'm promising you this now. We have already got, if I'm not mistaken, at least the first 2 months worth of guests lined up, and they are A-listers. These are great guests you're going to be hearing, and what's going to be great
Insane
is you're going to be
guests.
hearing you're going to
Mind
be
blowing.
you're going to be hearing A-list animation guests being interviewed by not just Rusty, but yours truly, who has worked with them before. So that's going to be a really interesting perspective.
Yeah, so you'll have
and
you'll have a bunch of you'll have A-listers, you'll have
Yes.
a A-list A-list host, and then you'll have the Trailer Park's finest here interviewing
Well, and by
some
the
of
way,
the best.
the guests are not just going to be they're not just going to be A-listers or people that you've necessarily heard of. We've got names. We've got big names that are coming your way.
People
But
you've
we've
heard
also got
of.
people that we've also got people that you probably haven't heard of, but whose work you will be in awe of and that has impacted your life. So,
Oh yeah, for sure. If you haven't heard of them specifically, you will have heard their voice. If you haven't
Yeah.
heard their voice, you will know their work. And if you don't know their
Right.
work, then you're just living in a rock.
So, you know what? I'm gonna let you take it from here, Rusty. That's all from
That's
me.
all
I
from
want to thank
F.
everybody who has tuned in and listened. Keep following us, like, share, subscribe, listen to the show. That's it from me. It's your old pal F. Zig a zig ah, party people.
Yep. We appreciate you guys watching, listening, and consuming the animation conversation. Stay tuned. Hey guys, you can find us at Instagram and Twitter at Animation Convo. You can find us on YouTube at Animation Conversation, and you can email us at theanimationconversation@gmail.com. Join us again for another animation conversation. This podcast is produced by Rogue Media Network.
This has been a Rogue Media Network production.